Well, hello and welcome to another of what we have called Something to Think About. Over the course of the last several weeks, we have tried to incorporate some things for us to, as believers, pause and give some additional thought to. And I've certainly enjoyed the variety of guests and topics. And today I am really pleased to welcome Dr. Troy Shoemaker. Dr. Shoemaker, great to have you. So first of all, thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
Hey, we're going to jump right into our conversation today. If you could, let me ask you this, we haven't talked about this, but if you could talk about, I don't know, some of the more important things that are connected to you, what are some of those topics that you'd bring up?
If you're talking to me personally, family, grandkids. Yes. And that connection that the Lord has given us then as a family, and my wife and I in particular, to this ministry.
Yeah.
That's important to us.
I've
been here 31 years. And
what do you like to do just for fun?
I'm an outdoorsman. I wanted something that I could do with my boys growing up. So we would go out in the woods and we would hunt and we would fish. Yeah. And we still do that to this day.
And you still like doing that stuff.
That's right.
And of course your boys love that.
Yes, they picked it up.
And I think you even got Jessica to...
She did. I've got pictures of her in the blind in her camo. And
yeah, pink camo. Yeah, that's really great stuff. Okay, hey, listen, what we're going to talk about today is something that I felt like you'd be a great person to talk to about. And I think I'm interested in it, and so I think our folks will be as well. We have been in, people are joking about 2020, but 2020 has been like one series of how could you plan for that events after another. And then if you just took our own geographic location in mind, we've had hurricanes. Now, we're recording this obviously prior to when it's going to be aired, but right now we're preparing for a second hurricane, which is kind of barreling our way.
Right.
And so it's been like crisis mode. And I thought it would be a really good conversation to have with you, just to tell us about how do you manage crisis situations, and what are some principles that you found? Maybe you didn't have to think about this prior to 2020, but maybe you didn't have to think about this just in normal life, but the position you're in right now. And then the more I thought about it, I thought, well, these principles probably do apply to what we might refer to as normal life, like families and people in their churches or in their places of employment. So I thought it'd be beneficial to just talk about crisis management. So first thing I want to ask you is, how is crisis leadership different than normal, everyday kind of leadership? Because you've got some experience with that in 2020. So what are some distinctions between the two?
Well, it's interesting right now in your introduction, you've used two terms, crisis management and crisis leadership. And there is a difference. And I teach here corporately, I teach our leadership team that we need you to be managers. Managers oversee operations and tasks and the day-to-day routine kind of things. But leaders not only look to management of day-to-day things, but they look to the future, toward possibility, toward eventualities. And so there is a difference. And I think God calls us and gives us talent, gives us gifts, some that are more management-oriented and some that are more leadership-oriented.
It's a great distinction.
And it is.
Both have to happen.
They both have to happen. They're both absolutely necessary. But if you stay in just management mode, then all you do is react to what's already happened. If you lead, then you begin to look to expect and try to help frame, as a matter of stewardship, what the Lord's given you in your personal life, in a ministry setting.
Is there any difference? I mean, not between leadership and management, but is there a difference between leadership through a crisis and just everyday leadership?
Well, the term is the same. Leadership is leadership, and it's said by many, Maxwell and others, leadership is influence. And that's true whether it's in a day-to-day situation or in what you would call a crisis.
Yeah.
So leadership is influence. Leadership is influencing other people to do what they ought to do what's best for them to do. As a pastor, you lead us spiritually and you help to guide our thinking toward our next step and what's best for us to take our next growth step or step of faith. And so you influence us. As a dad, I influence my family toward what they ought to do.
Yeah.
And as the president of a college, it's my goal, it's my mission to influence the college toward a direction that God would have us do. So leadership is influence, whether it's in a crisis or in a but a crisis, wow, there's something that's magnifying about that, isn't there? I mean, everything seems to be multiplied and magnified in a crisis, and so this emotional crossroads that you come to, this situation that needs decisive action, that magnifies the influence that you have. So I have said this to you, I've said it to other people personally, a crisis just seems to magnify the leadership and the need for leadership during that time.
Good. Okay, because during a crisis, everything's more intense. I mean, it's not that everything is entirely different, it's just magnified. And the pressures are funneled into this point of, okay, what do we do next? And you have to know immediately. You don't get the window of, well, let's think about it. I mean, this is a crisis and decisions have to be made. And then obviously, I think this, but have you found this to be true? Have you found that some of the principles that you might use as a dad or as a member of a family, I mean, talking about your broader family, your dad and your mom, like your dad went through some health challenges recently. He's doing great, but all of those things they intensify life.
That's right.
So have you found some universal aspects of principles that as the president of a college or a member of a family seem to be somewhat consistent?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when God built us to both interact with each other and with the world that He created around us, there are some universal principles.
Yeah.
And it applies to any situation.
Yeah. So you hear the word cancer.
Yeah.
This is now a family crisis.
That's right.
Or you hear our company shutting down.
Yeah.
I mean, this is another crisis. Yeah. Or you hear, I mean, these are hard things, but wow, our daughter left.
Yeah.
The crisis now is very real.
And you get that same gut check
in
every single one of them. And it's an emotional response, and you're reaching out for the same kind of support and guidance.
I mean, can you prepare for a crisis? Because we see, in hurricane season, prepare for the crisis. And so as a leader, how would we even think about preparing for a crisis? How do you do that?
In short, I'm not sure that a leader can prepare for a crisis outside of doing what he ought to do every day.
Yeah.
Here, take a biblical example like David in Scripture, where every day he cared for a flock and he protected them. He met their needs. When a bear came, when a lion came, he took care of them, and it was rather unceremonious, and it wasn't celebrated by everybody.
No songs written.
Yes, it was just his job. But when the crisis came before a nation and someone would have to stand before a giant, he had the confidence of what God had already done in his life, and he had already seen what God could take him to do. He stepped up and filled a role that he had confidence to do because he had seen what God had already done in his life. And so what prepared him for the crisis was his everyday life.
Yeah. Nobody goes out and says, I might have to face a giant someday,
right.
so I better be killing a couple bears and lions.
Yes.
He just did that. I like the word you said, unceremoniously. He just goes out, and this is what you do as a shepherd. And And the Lord used the everyday to ready him for the crisis.
That doesn't mean that you don't plan for contingencies.
Yeah.
So this is not on a personal level, but on a corporate level, we have things around here called hurricane plans.
Yeah.
And so we plan for what would happen if.
But the leading through,
yes.
You can't, I don't know that you can say,
yes.
I have to prepare for how am I going to respond if those are the line upon line building of character and integrity and such that actually comes out when the crisis hits. Moses, good example, I think.
Yes. We talked about this earlier on privately, but one of my heroes obviously is Moses, because he is put in a position of leadership for a company of people, for a nation. Yeah. But he didn't plan for the crisis that would come between Pharaoh and those people. But when he was needed, he had already been prepared. He had been taken to the backside of a desert. He had been given lessons of responsibility and humility that he didn't have when he was before in Egypt. Yeah. And when he had become what God needed him to be as an instrument for him, then God put him back in this position of responsibility, and he was ready for the crisis, whether he knew it or not.
Yeah. Don't you think it's interesting? He didn't know it.
No.
But God knew
it would have scared the fire out of him if he didn't know it. And I can attest to that. I'm just telling you, as a college president, I would have been afraid of the future. But you don't think about those crises as being the defining moments. Yeah. It's really, the defining moment in Moses' life was on the backside of the desert. It wasn't when he stood in front of Pharaoh.
I think that's really great. Nobody should go to the backside of the desert, so to speak, and say, I got to get ready to lead a nation.
That's right.
But God knows what he's doing. Yeah. And most often, if we think we're ready, we're probably not.
That's right.
If we wonder about our readiness, God then oftentimes says, well, okay, now you're going to depend on me to do what you couldn't do. Okay, so, I don't know that we've even talked about this, but what are some things that we might do not well that actually add to the crisis? Are there things that, have you ever seen, I've seen myself do this. I think I've added to the crisis because of my responses. And so what are some things that, this is also going to answer the other side of that, what shouldn't we do? Because it's going to add to the crisis. But have you ever seen people actually add to the crisis because of their response?
Yes, and I think the key there is in response. You add to a crisis on a personal level when you only respond to that crisis and you haven't prepared yourself spiritually, mentally. Every one of us is going to go through, every family is going to go through a time of crisis at some point in time. And
it's helpful to realize that too, because sometimes we might think we're the only ones that are going through this, but everybody goes through these times of crisis.
But it's the strength of your daily preparation up to that point that will help to get you through it. So if you only live in response, only backward looking, then you're going to add to the emotion, the drama, the hype of the crisis.
And that you can't change. You have no ability to touch your backward glance.
That's right.
So then you're kind of stuck in this whole world of crisis emotion. Right. So in opposition to that, in contrast to that, then
the farther you get into it, the more helpless you feel and the more depressed you feel and the more, in some cases, bitter because it's out of your control and you've been dealt this hand that you don't deserve or whatever. In contrast to that is having the positive, hopeful, and proactive posture of faith before God, that God is in control. He knew about this. You've seen him historically care for you. You've seen him come through in other people's lives. And with that hopefulness, then you won't operate in a spirit of fear. Paul wrote to Timothy in 2 Timothy and said, hey, I know your family.
Yeah.
I know your mom,
Yeah.
Lois, and Eunice, your grandmother.
Yeah.
I think those are the right names. And their unfeigned faith. You have a history. You have a heritage. You've seen God work in their lives and care for your family in the past. And then in the very next verses, he says, God hasn't given us a spirit of fear.
Yeah.
Because of that history, heritage of God's care, you don't have to live in fear and the emotion that comes with that. But he's given you power and love and a sound mind. And so how do you overcome a crisis with power, love, and a sound mind that comes with unfeigned faith?
Yeah. That would be a whole nother really good crisis management topic, power, love, sound mind. But those are excellent Bible principles for when we're facing the intensity of the crisis. Crisis, it just seems like it does, to borrow that word again, it just intensifies life. It's not that, it's kind of like we can handle those things spread out, over the course of months or whatever. But man, when you just bring that in and consolidate all of those elements, you've got a crisis. And power, love, sound mind, 3 great principles. Okay, so let's segue into that. Can you help us with any principles for leading through crisis? What are some things that you'd kind of personally you refer to yourself, or things that you've seen as helpful principles that are something that we could apply as well? Like, we might not be leading a college, but we all have influence, or should seek to be people of influence. So what are some things?
I wrote some down for you in hopes that you would ask. And the one is one we've just said: don't live in fear, but rather by faith, and understand God has given you the power, the love, and the sound mind to overcome that fear. Second one I would give you is be informed. Part of drama we see around us, part of hype we see, let's just say in a COVID situation, in our personal family life, we've had to decide how we would respond as a family, individually, how I would respond. And it's not going to be based upon what I see on the news. Or what I read in social media.
In a sense, all that's built on fear.
It is.
Sensationalism.
So I want to be informed, and I want to make, if leadership is influence, and it is, then I want to influence both myself, I want to lead myself and my family to do what's right and what's in their best interest. And so in order to do that, I need to be well informed so I can make best decisions going forward. And by the way, I do that on the college level as well. Understand the needs of the people that you serve, or the people that are around you in your family, is a leadership principle. Don't, in other words, focus on people, not on circumstances. And especially during a time of crisis.
Can you give us, can you flesh that out a little bit more? How can circumstances take me away from people? And how can I hone my thinking on what do they need?
It's very easy after Hurricane Sally to be interested in cleanup of my house, getting my foodstuffs back in the freezer that just got unplugged, and fixing the roof. And so there's circumstances all around me, and not be aware that my wife needs my support right now. My kids need
to breathe.
And it's okay. We're going to get through this together. You don't have to clean up the whole yard today. We're going to take it a day at a time. So this calm, confident support.
Good. That's helpful. Good. Okay. Any others?
Be calm and encouraging. I just mentioned that. Leaders must not add to the drama and emotion of a situation. People need you to be a calm, level-headed, thoughtful source of strength for them at that point in time.
And isn't that interesting? Even if you don't necessarily feel particularly calm, there is something about telling yourself to tell someone else it's going to be okay.
That's right.
It looks like you were thinking about something when I said that.
I was going to tell you that, I mean, I've had moments, tearful moments.
Yeah.
By myself on the back porch or walking down the street where I thought I was overwhelmed and unable to bear it. But those were intimate times with God when he said, hey, I've got you. Faithful is he who called you, who also will do it. And so, and there have been times too where a strong hand is needed. It's not a good word, but an arm, a shoulder is needed. But when a family member does get diagnosed with cancer or something, that you can't be a rock of strength and you can't appear unemotional. It's okay to cry. It's okay to share the emotion of the moment. But the consistency and constancy of your presence and your shoulder and your prayerful support is part of the calming effect in that. I'm there for you. I'm with you. We're going to get through this together.
Yeah. You made a really important distinction there as well, because sometimes leaders feel like they have to always be that one. And I don't think we're built to always and only be that one. Now, we're called to be that one in certain settings, but there's also a time when we just have to say, Lord, you know, I have to have something from you that I don't have myself.
That's right.
And that's a little challenging sometimes for leaders as well, that vulnerability aspect. But both of those, knowing the place where one's appropriate and the other's not, and embracing whichever one setting you find yourself in, really helpful.
We've heard all of our lives, haven't we, that when you need it, God will provide the grace that you need to get through it. And when a pastor says that from the pulpit and you're not going through the crisis in that moment, it has little meaning to you. But when you realize it in your own life, that, hey, we are going through this right now. We are having to deal with these things, and they are a crisis, a crossroads. And you start to see God's grace and hand in it. It is it's kind of hard to describe until you've been through it.
Yeah, and really, I don't know that I have a great word, but I don't know how meaningful it is when you are the one experiencing it. Peace that defies understanding. You know, grace to help in time of need. That you know, Thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety. You know, those are really special moments when you see God do those things for you. Any other principles that you want to?
I'll give you two more and I'll be done with my mini lecture here. One of them is, this is a good one, I think, don't judge other people's decisions or responses to the crisis. You do what's best and what's right for your family. Here I have to make a decision of what's best and what's right for a college institution. But if another college, another for you, another church wants to do it a different way, then they need to do what's best. And I'm not going to cast either dispersion or judgment on that situation.
Easy to do, but
it is.
But we haven't been called to lead every family.
That's right.
Every spouse, you know, every employment situation, every church. And but we certainly have a tendency to look at others.
It's human nature. And then my last point here is look for opportunities in the middle of crisis. We have seen over and over again in the last several months opportunities that had before never been realized to help people individually, schools and churches on levels that we never had before. Very easy in a crisis to withdraw into yourself and to put up the defensive armor to protect yourself against further harm in a crisis. But if you'll look, you'll see these opportunities that didn't exist before. And you'll be able to reflect God's love and His kindness and share the gospel in ways that just weren't possible before.
You know, you probably have some people in mind, and I know the first one that comes to my mind would be my dad and my mom. But I watched them at different crisis points. I got to learn something about them I couldn't have known otherwise. Crisis moments do actually provide us some valuable insights, and I think, all things being equal, both good and not so good, that when pressure's applied, you know, when Christ was in Gethsemane, you know, the wine press,
Right.
and life got really close, you know. He came through that obviously perfectly, but we go through the press oftentimes, and it starts to reveal things about us. And I suppose it's good for us to see about ourselves, but it's also a time when we get to see other people in ways that, like, wow, Lord, there's more there than I would have anticipated. And you see how people navigate in ways that, like, wow, what a blessing.
Yes.
You watch a person who goes through loss or whatever, and you see God show up and live through them in ways that are really special.
Yes.
Okay, so with that, what are some of the blessings that you found? Maybe this is a better question for 2021, if it's not the same as 2020. But if you could, I don't know, kind of step out of 2020 for a minute, do you see any blessings from the crisis that, for you personally, what's the Lord done for you? Because you have had a lot on your plate, okay? And, I mean, you just have had a lot of pressures. Anything from that you said, wow, Lord, I wouldn't have had this if it wouldn't have been for the crisis?
Certainly you see the nature of teamwork, of people rallying around a situation, common cause to overcome the crisis. So there's something confirming about this when everybody comes together and helps to respond in a unified manner. It's been good to see even the negative side of response. We are so tired, aren't we, of COVID and of restriction and of limitations and stuff, and the way people respond over time to the impatient nature of, I just want to get back to normal. But that's been good to see, because it helps you to understand how to both communicate better, how to support and serve better. I do find myself every day in this constant spirit of prayerfulness. Lord, help me to do what's right in this one situation. Help me to make the next best decision, take the next step. That's been both a comfort and a blessing during a time of crisis.
I think that relationship, God oftentimes is refining and deepening, and He uses crisis moments to actually accomplish it. I mean, when do you seek the Lord in this to the same degree? When there is no crisis, no urgency, no difficulty. I mean, we do, but probably not with the same urgency with which we find ourselves in crisis moments. Any scriptures that have really stood out? You shared one from Timothy already, but any others that you've just said, man, these have been gems for me?
There's one passage of scripture that I've shared with leadership team and has been real to me. And it's not only fit for a crisis, but is also part of everyday, both Christian walk and daily life. It's Romans 12. So this is coming right off of, I beseech you therefore, brethren. But it down in verse 10, be kindly affectioned one toward another in brotherly love, in honor, preferring one another. When has that been more apropos in a nation of turmoil than today, in honor, preferring one another? Not slothful in business. God's called you to do a job, and so do it with the best of your ability and with some excellence. Fervent in spirit, be passionate about what God's called you to do, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope. There's hope.
Wow.
You're in the middle of it, but rejoice that there is God's still in control. Patient in tribulation. 2021 will get here. But for now, be patient, be comforted where you are, continuing instant in prayer, constant open line with God, distributing to the necessity of saints, given to hospitality. When we talk about opportunity to meet the need of other people, certainly a couple of...
There's a lot
there is
loaded
in
that passage
Yes.
about crisis moments, you know. That's a whole nother great biblical outline for what do you do. Okay, this is a practical question, and we're going to wrap it up really with this, okay? You and your wife work closely together. Mm-hmm. Now, I think most families, marriages, in pressure moments, it causes, I don't know, the potential for, it doesn't cause, it just provides an environment that can put strain on relationship. And you guys work very closely together. Mm-hmm. So, you know, that's true for a lot of people that may be watching this, but not everybody. But all of us would understand the dynamic of, for example, if a college student is watching this, you have, when there's pressure on a room, we're just talking about 3 students in a room, but man, things are stressful. That whole dynamic can change. Or a work group area, a family, but then certainly with a couple. So what do you notice? What are some things that you try to implement? Because I think stress, crisis, and relationships, not just like my broader circle, but that very intimate circle is one of the most important. Mm-hmm. So what are some thoughts about that? Mm-hmm.
Well, you're getting really personal now. And I don't know whether I should answer it the way you want me to answer it or what's real.
Give me a little of both.
Because the truth is, I don't always handle it right. But there are some principles, I think, that help to overcome failures.
Yeah.
You just used words, stress, crisis, and relationship, and sometimes those are counterintuitive and counterproductive to each other. When stress and crisis come, they have a tendency to have a negative effect on a relationship. Yeah. And so when I'm stressed at work, then sometimes the people who are closest to me are the people that unfortunately bear the brunt of my response, my poor response to stress.
Yeah. No, the good thing about that is, to me, we want the people, our family, they know us the best. Yeah. The people we work with, the closest, they know us the best. And they oftentimes love us the most.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
They have to.
So there is some I don't know, we are grateful for the grace that we get shown sometimes with those more closely related. Right. And I think oftentimes those people also know our heart, our motives better than others, and that they give us maybe a little more space.
Yes. So Denise and I do work in side-by-side offices, and that presents its own challenges in that we would have potentially the tendency to because we live together and work together, bring work home and bring home to work. And we've had to make a conscious effort, and we were advised to do so by our predecessors, Dr. and Mrs. Horton. Mm-hmm. And it was timely and meaningful advice that there be separation between work and home.
Yeah.
We bring our computers home. We work hours well beyond office time, but there's intentional time for each other.
Yeah.
For
where you put
kids,
it away and
for grandkids.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that all leads to commitment to each other.
Yeah.
If she knows I'm committed to her, even when she's stressed, when I know she's committed to me, even in the middle of a crisis, then the whole rest of the world may be falling apart. But if that's there, and that's what I go home to, then that haven that I have at home is undisturbed even in the middle of a swirling whirlwind around you.
Yeah. When you make that first relationship a priority, it is interesting how you do have this respite, you know, and even when that feels the reality of additional pressure, because relationships do absorb that. When you're pressured, you're sharing some of that with your spouse or with people closest to you. But when you establish, listen, this is protected, established, we're going to, this is first, there is something reassuring about. Yeah. If the world falls apart, we're not going to.
That's right.
And
she needs to know that too, by the way. It's not just assumed. She needs to hear it.
Yeah.
She needs to see it evidenced in the way she's treated, revered, and honored in the home, the daily time you set aside for her.
Yeah.
That commitment is not just understood. Well, I thought you knew that I was. No, it's seen, heard, delivered.
And you guys, your offices are side by side. Mm-hmm. Does she steal your candy? Because my wife knows where I keep my candy in my office. And do you have any advice on that? Because
she doesn't let me have candy. Wow. And so
I'm on my own on that one right there. I got to find a better hiding spot. A file marked, whatever. Really boring. Hey, the conversation has not been boring. Really good. I think that crisis moments reveal a lot about us. So we should be learning something about ourselves from crisis moments as well. That we can just do some personal evaluation like that. That crisis revealed a lot of things. Put something under stress, you're going to see what happens to the thing. Mm-hmm. And it's good for us to figure out some things about our own selves and then take some steps. Lord, I need some help in this area. And then I loved how we opened, and that is, you don't really prepare for the giant.
Yeah.
You just do life well, and then God knows if you're ready for the giant. Mm-hmm. It's reassuring, isn't it, to know that He's not going to put a crisis on you that you're not prepared to handle. Right. So, hey, thank you. I know your crisis schedule is pretty full. So I really mean this. Thanks for taking some time to provide something for us to think about. Really great conversation.
Thank you for the privilege.
Thank you for joining us for another something to think about. I hope you found the conversation to not only be insightful, but really practical. These are not just principles for a college president. I think they're life principles for people like you and me. So thanks again for joining us for another something to think about.